My parents sold my house while I was 1,000 miles away for work. They forged my name on the deed to do it. Then they took the money and flew to Italy with my brother. My father told me later, smiling over Thanksgiving dinner, that my house had paid for the best trip of his life. What he forgot is that I read property records for a living. Every document about that house was in a green folder I kept in my desk. By the time I sat down at his table, I had already pulled the county file, and I knew exactly what was in it. I never raised my voice once. Welcome back to the Daily Confessions. This is the channel for the people who were always the responsible one, the one handed the bills and never the credit, the one everybody assumed would just fix it quietly. The quiet ones keep their receipts. This story is built out of mine. Let me start at the beginning, because I want you to understand exactly what they took and exactly who I'd let them think I was. My name is Nora Bridger. I'm 34. I'm a title examiner. That means when somebody buys or sells a house, I'm the person who checks the history of it. Every owner, every loan, every lien, every signature. I makes what they're selling and that nobody lied on the paperwork. People lie on paperwork all the time. They lie about who signed. They lie about what they owe. And they always hope nobody pulls the file. My whole job is pulling the file. I'm very good at it. 6 years ago, I bought a house. A small one. A 1952 Craftsman on Linden Court with a sagging porch and good bones. I paid for it myself. My name, my credit, my down payment that took 4 years to save. I put a new roof on it the first fall. I fixed the porch myself the next spring. The deed said it plain. Nora J. Bridger, a single woman, paid in full, free and clear. It was the first thing in my life that was completely mine. I grew up 2 states away in a town called Delphi Springs. My father, Russ, sold farm equipment, then insurance, then a little of everything. He could shake your hand and make you feel like the most important person in the room and forget your name before you reached your truck. My mother, Diane, kept his books. She kept the bank account. She kept the peace. And in her mind, those were all the same job, which was keeping money moving quietly inside the family. To my mother, paperwork was never a rule. It was a polite way of moving things around between people who loved each other. Remember that about her. It explains everything she did. And then there was my brother, Cole. 3 years younger, the golden one. Cole never finished anything. He started a landscaping business that folded, a vending route that folded, some crypto thing that folded. Every time the money to start it came from my parents. And behind my parents, quietly, the money came from me. Because that was my job in this family from the time I could carry a plate. I was the one who cleaned things up. A bill nobody could cover, a mess nobody wanted to admit, a problem that would embarrass us if the neighbors heard. That came to me, and I made it quietly disappear. Nora's fine. Nora's got it handled. Nora doesn't need anything. I made honor roll, and my mother told me not to brag because Cole was struggling. I paid my own way through school. When I got my first real job, my father said it must be nice to sit in air conditioning all day. In my family, being capable didn't get you thanked. It got you handed the next mess. So I left. I built a life 2 states over that was mine. But I never really put the role down. You don't, when it's the only thing your family ever valued you for. I just carried it from farther away. Now here's my one mistake. Remember it. Because everything turns on it. 2 years ago, my mother called me crying. My father had gotten behind on the lot. There was a lien. They might lose the house I grew up in. Could I help? And the old machine in me turned on before I even decided anything. Of course I'd help. I was the one who cleaned things up. So I drove down and I did it the careful way. I didn't just hand them cash. I refinanced my own paid-off house, pulled out $40,000 in equity, and lent it to them with a signed note. Because I love them, and because I'm not a fool. or so I thought. I remember sitting at my parents' kitchen table that day, signing my own refinance papers. My mother had laid everything out in her neat way, little pencil marks where each signature went. And my father stood behind me with his coffee, watching me sign. And he said, "That's the way. Just sign wherever your mother's marked it. She's got it all sorted." I half laughed. I signed where she marked. I didn't read every line, because she was my mother and it was just family paperwork. And my father watched me do it and said, "All this fuss people make over a signature. In a family, a signature's just a formality. We all know who's good for what." I should have heard that. I work in deeds. I know that a signature is the opposite of a formality. A signature is the whole thing. But he was my father, and I was at the kitchen table I grew up at, so I let it go past me. To get the loan closed fast, my mother had a few documents notarized at that same table by an old family friend named Lyle Pruitt. Lyle had been a notary in Delphi Springs for 40 years. He did it as a favor. And when it was over, my mother kept a folder, copies of my deed, my refinance papers, my signature on 6 different pages, Lyle's stamp. She filed it away with the family's money paperwork, because to her, that's all it was. I didn't think twice about it. She was my mother. Why would she ever need my deed? I found out why on a Tuesday in October. I was on a job in Pennsylvania, standing under a county bridge with a clipboard when my phone buzzed. A text from my neighbor back home, a retired teacher named Gwen who watched our street like a hawk. It was a photo and 3 words. "Nora, what's this?" The photo was my front yard, my maples, my fixed porch, my green door, and staked in the grass was a real estate sign. And bolted across it at an angle was a bright red rider that said, "Sold." I didn't sell my house. I hadn't been there in 4 months. I hadn't listed anything or signed anything. I stood under that bridge for a while. I'm a person who doesn't panic, so I didn't. I texted Gwen back. "I didn't sell it. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming." Then I called the number on the sign, and I didn't say who I was. I said I was an agent asking about the closed property on Linden Court. A cheerful young man told me yes, that one closed 3 weeks ago. All cash. Quick close. The family sold it. Lovely little house. The family. All cash. 3 weeks ago. I sat in my truck in a Pennsylvania parking lot and I made myself open my phone again, because I'd had a cold feeling and I wanted to know if I was right. I went to Cole's page. My brother posts everything. And there it was. A whole album posted while I was standing under that bridge. Cole on a cliff over blue water. Cole at a long dinner table with my parents, all of them tan and laughing. And the caption under it, in my brother's own words, was this: "When your family finally bets on the right kid." The right kid. Posted to the world. Paid for with my house. I want you to understand. At that point, I still didn't have proof of a single thing. But I knew. Somebody had used my name to sell my house, and my brother was on a cliff in Italy calling himself the right kid. That was the moment I stopped being hurt and started being precise. Here's what I did, and it's the whole reason I can tell you this story sitting calm in a chair. I did not call my parents and scream. I did not comment on Cole's photos. I drove home that night, 9 hours, and I did not go to my street and I did not go to my parents' house. I went to a motel on the edge of town. Because I already knew the first thing I needed wasn't a fight. It was the file. I'll be honest about that motel, because I don't want you to think any of this was easy. I sat on a hard bed 2 miles from the house I built with my own hands, and I wasn't allowed to drive to it or sleep in it, because legally I wasn't even sure yet whose it was. I didn't cry, but I lay awake a long time. And I thought about how, If any of them had been in my place, I'd have driven all night to help. Because I was the one who showed up, and not one person in my family would ever sit in a motel like this for me. They'd just assume I had it handled. And then I got up the next morning, put on the same clothes I work in, and went to do the only thing in the world I'm sure I'm good at. When the county recorder's office opened, I was the first person at the counter. I knew that office. I'd worked in one just like it for years. Nobody in a recorder's office cares whose daughter you are. The record is the record. I asked the clerk for the recorded documents on the parcel. The full chain, certified copies. I didn't tell her it was my house. I just paid the per-page fee in cash, sat down at the public terminal, and started to read. The same way I read 100 files a month for strangers. And there it was. The lie, recorded for anyone in the world to pull. A deed, dated 5 weeks earlier. It transferred my house from Nora Bridger to a married couple I'd never heard of. And at the bottom, on the line above my printed name, was a signature. It wasn't my signature. It was close. Somebody had a copy to work from, and I knew exactly which copy, because there was only one folder in the world with my signature in it, and my mother had kept it. They'd gotten the loop of the N, but I've signed my name on 10,000 legal documents, and I know my own hand the way I know my own face. The pressure was wrong. The rhythm was wrong. It was a drawing of my signature. To anyone trained, it was obviously fake. All this fuss people make over a signature, my father had said. He really believed that. He had no idea he was about to lose everything to one. And underneath it was a notary block, a stamp, a commission number, a signature, certifying that I had personally appeared and signed of my own free will. The name on the stamp was Lyle Pruitt. I kept reading the chain, because a trained eye never stops at the deed. And the chain told me the rest. Recorded right behind the deed was a mortgage. The buyers hadn't really paid all cash. They'd borrowed most of it from a regional bank, and that bank had recorded a real loan against my house. Which meant this wasn't just my family and 2 strangers. There was a bank in it now. There was a lender holding a loan secured by a house the seller never owned. The mess had a shape, and the shape was bigger than a kitchen table. I sat there holding a certified copy of a forged deed, and I felt something I want to be honest about. Not rage. Relief. Because for 2 days I hadn't known. Now I knew. My mother had taken the folder she kept in good faith. My father had forged my name. They'd used a notary they'd known 40 years to certify the lie. And they'd sold my house to send my brother to Italy. But here's the thing they didn't understand about my job. A forged deed isn't a weak deed. It's void. It transfers nothing. It's a piece of paper that drew a picture of a sale that never happened. Which meant my house was still my house. It had never stopped being mine. There were just a lot of other people tangled up in it now. 2 buyers, a bank. And somebody was going to have to pay to untangle all of them. This was the moment the old instinct showed up. My whole life, when the family made a mess, I cleaned it up quietly so nobody would be embarrassed. That instinct was right there, warm and familiar, telling me to fix my own deed, eat the loss, keep the peace. I felt it, and I set it down. This time, I wasn't going to make the mess disappear. This time, I was going to build it into something everyone would have to look at. So I did what I do. I pulled the rest of the file. The first thing I needed was the money trail. My parents thought I read old documents. What I actually do is follow value. The deed told me a sale happened. To follow the money, I needed the closing statement, the page that shows exactly where every dollar went on closing day. That page doesn't get recorded at the county. It sits at the title company. So I called a woman named Priya who runs a title office 2 counties over. We've traded files for years. I drove to her office, laid the certified deed on her desk, and told her the truth before I asked for anything. "Priya, this is my house. That's not my signature. I was in Pennsylvania the day it was signed, and I can prove it." Priya looked at the signature a long time. Then she looked at the notary block. Then she said the word that ends careers in our business. "Nora, this is void." And then she went quiet and fast, the way good title people do, and she pulled the closing. After the buyer's mortgage and the costs, the sale put a little over $290,000 into one account, by wire, on closing day. The destination was a checking account at the bank on the square in Delphi Springs. My mother's account. The one she'd controlled for 30 years. That's where they were careless. The money didn't go anywhere clever. It went straight into my mother's regular account. Because in her mind, it wasn't a crime. It was just family money being moved around, the way she'd done her whole life. Priya printed me a certified copy of the settlement statement and slid it across the desk. She held on to it for a second before she let go, and she said, "Nora, these are your parents." And I said, "I know exactly whose they are." Now I had the spine of it. A forged deed, a void transfer, a wire of $290,000 traced from my house to my mother's account, in writing. Two things still bothered me: the buyers and the stamp. I pulled the buyers next, not to hurt them, to understand them. And within an hour, I knew who they were, and it changed the whole shape of what I was willing to do. A young couple, first house. His name was Marcus. He worked nights at the hospital as a tech. Her name was Dana. She taught 3rd grade. They'd put down every dollar they had and borrowed the rest. There were photos online of them standing on my porch, the one I fixed myself, holding a little sign that said, "We bought our first home." They were beaming. They had no idea they were standing on a porch that had been stolen, in a house that was never legally theirs, with a mortgage on a property they didn't own. That was the moment this stopped being only about me. My parents hadn't just stolen from their daughter. They'd handed the wreckage to a 3rd grade teacher and a hospital tech who'd done nothing but try to buy a home. I kept that photo of them on my porch open on my phone for days. They are the reason I did what I did next, instead of quietly fixing my own deed and walking away. Then I dealt with the stamp. I called Lyle Pruitt. I didn't threaten him. The tone of that call mattered, so listen. I was quiet and sad, and I told him I'd pulled a deed with his stamp on it, and that I knew for a fact I never appeared before him to sign it, because I was in Pennsylvania that day, and I had the work logs and the hotel bills and the toll records to prove every hour of it. Then I stopped talking and let the silence sit. Lyle made a sound on the phone I won't forget. Lyle hadn't forged anything. He'd done something almost worse for a notary. My mother had handed him a stack of papers at her kitchen table and said, "Nora signed these already. Just need your stamp." And Lyle stamped them without watching the signature happen. He'd certified that a person appeared before him who never did. He'd done it as a favor for people he'd known 40 years, and it had never once come back on him, because nobody had ever used one of his favors to forge a deed. "Nora," he said, and his voice was shaking. "Diane told me you'd sign them. I've known your mother 40 years. I never thought—" I told him the truth, which is the only thing I wanted to tell anyone in this whole story. I told him I wasn't out to destroy him. I told him there were 2 ways for him to be standing when this was over. He could be the man who got used by people he trusted and told the truth the second he understood. Or he could be the man who kept stamping the lie. I told him I already had everything I needed. I wasn't asking for his help. I was offering him a door. He took it. He wrote out a statement in his own hand. Who handed him the papers? Diane. What she told him. That the signer never appeared. He had it notarized by a different notary 2 towns over, which I respected. He sent me a copy. And before he hung up, he said, "Your grandfather would have made me watch the pen." And I said, "Yes, he would have. But you can be the one who fixed it." So now I had it all. The certified forged deed, the recorded mortgage, the settlement statement tracing the wire to my mother's account, and a sworn statement from the notary naming my mother as the person who handed him the forgery. Every page went into one folder, not to hide it this time, to carry it into the open. And then I made the decision that most people in my chair don't make. I wasn't going to be the one swinging the hammer. I was going to hand the hammer to the people whose job it is to swing it in the right order so that by the time anyone knew I'd moved, every door was already shut. The first door was the title insurance claim. When Marcus and Dana bought my house, they bought title insurance, the way everybody does. It exists for exactly this. So I made sure the claim got triggered. A claims investigator called me, careful and slow, and near the end, he asked the question everybody asks. "Ms. Bridger, the people who allegedly forged this, our research suggests they're your parents. Are you certain you want to proceed?" I looked at the photo of Marcus and Dana on my stolen porch, and I said, "A 3rd-grade teacher is about to lose her first house because of my family. Proceed." The machinery started to turn, and it could not be turned back. The second door was the prosecutor. This was the one I thought about longest, because once you walk into that building, it stops being a family matter and becomes a case. But Marcus and Dana had already decided it for me. So I took the file to the county prosecutor's office in Delphi Springs. The prosecutor's name was Pat Healy. 20 years on the job, and no sense of humor about people who forge deeds. She gave me 20 minutes. I'd built the folder so it didn't need more. I laid it out the way I'd lay out a title problem for a client. Here is the deed. Here is the signature. Here is my proof I was in another state. Here is the notary's sworn statement naming my mother. Here is the settlement statement. Here is the wire. Here is the account it landed in. Pat Healy read it without a word for a while. Then she looked up. "You understand these are your parents?" And I said, "Yes, better than anyone in this building ever will. I also understand they forged a legal document, certified it with a deceived notary, sold a house they didn't own to a young couple who did nothing wrong, and wired the money into my mother's account. I'm not asking you to feel anything about it. I'm asking you to read the file." She read it. And about 10 minutes in, she stopped being a person doing me a favor and started being a prosecutor with a clean case in front of her, which is a very specific change to watch happen on someone's face. She took the folder. She gave it a case number. And that was the moment the green folder stopped being mine and became the county's. Everything was now in motion, and not one piece of it had my voice attached to it. I hadn't screamed at anyone. I hadn't posted anything. I'd walked paper into the 3 places where it does the work: the title insurer, the recorder, the prosecutor. Then I went quiet and waited. While I was waiting, my brother called me. Cole never calls me, so I knew the second I saw his name. He was friendly. "How's work? How's the bridge job?" And then, casual, like it was nothing, he asked when I was last out at Linden Court. He was fishing. And I gave him nothing. I said work had me traveling, I hadn't been home in months. And then Cole, who could not help himself, who has never in his life been able to leave a thing alone, laughed and said, "Honestly, sis, it's not like you were ever even there. House like that's wasted on somebody who's never home." And he laughed again, like he'd made a joke, and hung up. House like that's wasted on somebody who's never home. My brother said that to me about my own house, 3 weeks after the family sold it out from under me, and he had no idea I knew, and no idea he'd just told me, in his own smug voice, exactly how all of them justified it. He wasn't nervous. That's the part that got me. He wasn't even nervous. He thought he was the right kid, and he thought I'd never find out, and he thought the worst thing that could happen was that I'd be a little hurt and get over it, the way I always got over everything, quietly, so nobody had to feel bad. He had no concept that finding out wasn't the danger. The danger was that I'd find out, and then, for the first time in my life, not clean it up. And then my mother called and invited me to Thanksgiving. Sit with that. They'd forged my name, sold my house, and flown to Italy on the money. The prosecutor already had the file, and my mother called me warm as anything, said the whole family would be together, Cole was bringing his new girlfriend, and could I bring the green bean dish I make? She had no idea I knew. In her mind, the house was sold, the money was spent, the trip was had, and the only loose end was whether I'd ever find out. And she'd decided I probably wouldn't, because in 34 years I had never once made a fuss. I said yes. Of course I'd come. I'd bring the green beans. Then I called a lawyer of my own to make sure I did the last part right. Sandra Ocaño, real estate litigation. She read the folder and got very focused. She confirmed all of it. The deed was void. The house was mine. And she asked what I wanted out of the dinner, because she could tell I planned to go. I told her the truth. I wasn't going to confront them to get anything. There was nothing left to get. The insurer knew. The recorder had the chain. The prosecutor had the case. Every door was already shut, in the right order, weeks before I'd sit down at that table. There was nothing they could move and nothing they could hide. I wasn't going to win at that dinner. I'd already won, on paper, quietly. I was going for one reason. My whole life, I cleaned up this family's messes in private, so no one would ever have to look at them. This time, just once, I wanted to set the mess on the table, in the light, and let everyone look. Sandra said, "Then go, but say less than you want to. Let the paper talk." I took that advice. Thanksgiving at my parents' house never changes. The same clock over the same table. The smell of my mother's sage dressing. The good plates with the gold rim that come down twice a year. There were 11 of us. My parents, Cole and his new girlfriend, a sweet, bewildered woman named Brittany who had no idea what she'd walked into. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, who never liked my father, and who I'd quietly made sure would be there. My uncle, 2 cousins, and Lyle Pruitt and his wife, because Lyle had come to Bridger Thanksgivings for 20 years. And because weeks earlier, I'd asked my mother, sweetly, whether the Pruitts were coming, and made sure the answer was yes. I brought the green beans. I hugged my mother. I let my father clap me on the shoulder and call me the busy one. I sat in my old chair by the drafty storm door, the one with the latch that never catches, the chair nobody ever offered to trade. The green folder was in the bag by my foot. And I waited. Through the dishes, through Grace, through the first round of plates. Cole started before my father did. He was showing Brittany photos on his phone, loud enough for the table, narrating the trip. The cliff. The water. The restaurant where the dinner cost more than my monthly mortgage. And then he looked down the table at me, and he smiled. And he said, "You should have seen it, Nora. Best 2 weeks of my life." And then, because he could never leave a thing alone, he added, "Don't feel too left out. Somebody had to stay behind and be responsible, right?" A couple of people laughed. My mother said, "Cole," but soft, the way she said everything to Cole, which was not really a correction. I didn't answer him. I just looked at him for a second too long, and something flickered behind his eyes, because even Cole could feel the temperature change. Then my father picked it up, the way he always picks up whatever's in the air. He'd had a glass and a half of wine and a captive table. He spread his hands, generous, the host of the world, and he said the line I'll hear in my head for the rest of my life. It really was the best trip we ever took. He winked at me. Don't worry, sweetheart. The house paid for it. The table laughed. Most of them didn't understand. Cole understood. Cole's smile froze. My mother understood, and her face did a small, frightened thing, and she said, Russ, low. But the rest just laughed, because Russ Bridger being charming about a vacation was nothing new. I set down my fork. I folded my hands. And I said, quiet enough that the table had to go still to hear me. Which house, Dad? He blinked. What? Which house paid for it? I said. The one on Linden Court? The one with my name on the deed? The one I bought and paid for and put a roof on? Is that the house that paid for your trip? Nobody laughed now. The clock ticked. My Aunt Carol set her wine glass down very carefully, the way you set something down when you've realized you're about to need both hands. And my father made his first wrong move, because he still didn't understand that this was not the kind of argument he could win out loud. He laughed, a little less sure. Nora, don't make this weird. It worked out. Family helps family. You weren't using the equity. And Cole, because Cole cannot stop, leaned back in his chair and said, yeah, it's the most that house ever did for anybody. That was the last smug thing my brother said that night. I want to show everyone something, I said. I reached into the bag, took out the green folder, and opened it. I didn't slam anything down. Sandra told me to let the paper talk, so I did. I set the pages out one at a time, flat, in the cleared space in the middle of the table, the way Priya had handed them to me. Certified. Stamped. Official. The room was so quiet I could hear each page settle. This is the deed that sold my house 3 weeks before Dad's trip, I said. This is the signature on it. I turned it so the table could see. That's not my signature. I was in Pennsylvania the day it was signed. Here are my work logs, my hotel records, my toll passes. I never met the buyers. I never agreed to sell. And here's the part Dad doesn't understand. I looked at him. A forged deed doesn't transfer anything. It's void. You didn't sell my house. You can't. You drew a picture of selling it and cashed a check. I set down the next page. This is the settlement statement. $290,000 wired on closing day into an account at the bank on the square. I looked at my mother. Your account, Mom. The one you've had for 30 years. The silence was total now. Brittany had stopped looking at her plate. She was looking at Cole, really looking at him. The way you look at someone you're learning in real time, and you could watch her do the math on the man she'd flown to Italy with. Across the table, Lyle Pruitt had gone the color of the tablecloth, and his wife had put her hand over his. Then I set down the last page in front of Lyle. And this is Lyle's sworn statement about who handed him these papers at this kitchen table and what she told him to get him to stamp them. I looked at Lyle. I'm not angry at you, Lyle. You did the right thing the second you understood. I want everyone here to hear that. My father had stopped smiling. For the first time in my life, I watched him sit at the head of his own table, in a room full of people who'd known him 40 years, with nothing to say. He opened his mouth once. He looked at the deed. He looked at the settlement statement. He looked at Lyle. He looked at my mother, who had her hand over her mouth. And the charm, the thing he'd run his whole life on, the thing that had always let him talk his way out of every room, just wasn't there. All this fuss over a signature, he'd told me. And now there was a signature on the table that he could not talk away, and it was the only thing in the room with any voice left. Cole broke. He shoved back from the table so hard his chair went over. "You're going to ruin us. You understand that? You're going to put Mom and Dad in—" And he couldn't say the word, the one with bars in it. He just stood there with his hands shaking, the way mine hadn't shaken once through any of this. And I looked at my brother and said the truest thing I said all night. "No, Cole. I didn't forge my own name and sell my own house and post photos from Italy calling myself the right kid. I just pulled the file. Everything that's about to happen, somebody at this table already did. Weeks ago. The prosecutor already has it. I just read it back to you. That word went around the table like cold water. That was the moment they understood this wasn't a family fight they could talk down. It was already a case. And Cole's panic finally found the bottom of it, because Cole realized, right there in front of Brittany, that he'd spent 2 weeks on a cliff posting trophies of a crime, in public, with his own name on them. My mother started to cry, and I'll be honest, because I never lie to you in these stories. It still hurt. Watching my mother cry at her own table did not feel like winning. It felt like the saddest thing in the world. She said my name like a wound. "Nora, we were going to pay it back. It wasn't supposed to—" And I gave her the truth too, gently, because she was the one person there I took no pleasure in hurting. "Mom, you didn't borrow it. You took it. You moved it the way you move everything, like the rules were just a polite suggestion between family. They're not. And the difference between borrowing and taking is the whole reason there's a case number now." Then I said the thing I'd driven 9 hours and waited 3 weeks to say out loud, at the table where I spent my whole childhood being told not to make a fuss. "I'm not making a fuss," I said. "I'm just not cleaning this one up." I closed the folder. I stood. I got my coat from the same hook it had hung on at every Thanksgiving of my life. I told my Aunt Carol I'd call her. I told Lyle to take care of himself. And on my way past Brittany, I said, quietly, that she seemed like a nice person and might want to ask some questions. She nodded. She'd already started. Then I walked out into the cold, drove to my motel, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I slept through the night. Now I'll tell you how it ended, because I promised you something concrete, not just a feeling. I got my house back, clean. The void deed was struck from the record. Sandra filed a corrective deed in the same county file where the lie had lived, so anyone who ever pulls that chain again reads the whole true story. My name. Free and clear. Like it always was. Marcus and Dana did not lose their first home for nothing. The title insurer made them whole, every dollar, which is exactly what title insurance is for. They bought a different house, a real one, from people who actually owned it. Dana sent me a card once, after she found out the whole story. It just said thank you, and underneath, smaller, "I can't imagine doing what you did." I keep it in the green folder. It's the only thing in there that isn't evidence. And then the machinery did what machinery does. The title insurer, having paid out, turned around and went after the people who caused the loss, my parents. The bank that had loaned money on a house that was never for sale went after them too. The claims landed exactly where the paper pointed. Not on me. Not on the teacher. On a kitchen table in Delphi Springs. And the bank account my mother had controlled for 30 years, the one the stolen money had landed in, got frozen while it all got sorted. For the first time in her life, my mother could not move the family money around, because the law was finally standing between her and the checkbook. The criminal case moved slower, the way criminal cases do. I was a witness and a victim, nothing more. I'd handed Pat Healy a file that didn't need me to argue it, and then I stepped back, because the second you try to steer it, you become part of the mess instead of the person who pulled the file. An accusation isn't a conviction, and everyone is entitled to the process, even people who never gave me an ounce of it. In the end, my father took responsibility rather than put a forged deed, a deceived notary, and a wire transfer in front of a jury, because there is no defense for a thing that's all on paper. There was a plea. There was restitution ordered. And here is the small, strange detail I think about most. Cole's Italy photos, the ones he posted to the whole world calling himself the right kid, ended up in the file too. The trophies of the crime, time-stamped and captioned in his own hand. My brother documented the spending of stolen money himself and handed it to the county for free. Cole lost the thing he'd counted on his whole life without ever naming it, the family money behind him, ready to catch every business that folded. It's gone now. The well is dry and the people who ran it are in restitution. Brittany asked her questions and then did the smart thing and left. Cole had to sell the truck and move back into my parents' house, into the house I'd kept them from losing 2 years ago, the favor that started all of this. He and I don't speak. Not dramatically. There's just nothing left to say across the distance between a person who pulls the file and a person who hoped no one ever would. My mother and I are in the strange, slow place you end up after something like this. The place where there's love and there's a case number, and they have to live in the same house. A few months after the dinner, she called me. She didn't apologize. She asked me, in her old, soft voice, whether I'd help her sort out some of the paperwork, because it had all gotten so complicated, and I was always so good at that sort of thing. I said no. Not cruelly, just clearly, because I finally understood what she was really asking. She wasn't asking for help. She was asking me to do the thing I'd always done, to take the family's mess and make it quietly disappear, so no one would have to look at it. That had been my whole job since I could carry a plate, and it was the job that ended the day they used my own folder against me. I told her I'd talk to her, but I would never again be the person who cleans this family up in the dark. Keeping the peace in our family had only ever meant one thing. I lost quietly, so everyone else could be comfortable loudly. Those days are over. And I kept the house. Of course I kept the house. It was always mine. I drove back to Linden Court the week the corrective deed recorded, and I pulled the real estate sign out of my own front lawn with my own hands and threw it in the trash. Then I sat on the porch I'd fixed myself, in the house that was clean and mine and free and clear again, and I let myself rest. For the first time in my life, there was no mess waiting for me to handle. I'd handed it to the people whose job it was, and the world had taken it from my hands. Here's the thing my family forgot about me. They thought I read old papers for a living. They handed me a folder thinking it was a favor. They forged my name thinking I'd never pull the file. I always pull the file. If you've ever been the capable one, the one everybody assumed wouldn't mind, the one handed the bill and never the credit, hear me. You're allowed to stop cleaning it up. You're allowed to set the folder down, flat, and let the truth just sit there being a fact. If this reached something you've carried, tell me in the comments, and subscribe. There's a new confession here every day, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for sitting with me to the end.